Hello everyone, my name is Eduardo Chacin, and today I'll be discussing the ethics of digital piracy. When most people hear the word piracy, they immediately think about downloading movies, games, music, or software for free. But today, I want to go beyond whether it's simply legal or illegal. Instead, I want to ask the more interesting question: is digital piracy ever ethically acceptable? The action I'm evaluating is downloading copyrighted digital content without paying or obtaining permission from the copyright owner. The ethical actor is any individual who chooses to download or distribute copyrighted digital content without authorization. This could be someone downloading a movie from a torrent site, installing cracked software, sharing paid textbooks online, or pirating video games. Unlike stealing a physical object, digital piracy involves copying information. The original owner doesn't lose their copy, which is the one reason this topic creates so much debate. So, first, let's define digital piracy. Digital piracy is the unauthorized copying, downloading, sharing, or distributing of copyrighted digital content. Examples include movies, television shows, music, software, video games, ebooks, and even academic textbooks. The internet has made piracy incredibly easy. A file can be copied perfectly in seconds and shared with millions of people around the world. Unlike physical goods, digital products can be duplicated infinitely at almost no cost. This creates an ethical issue because it forces us to balance two important values. On one hand, creators deserve compensation for their work. On the other, many people believe information and education should be widely accessible, especially when prices are so high or the content is no longer available for purchase. Let's look at the arguments people make in favor of piracy. One common argument is accessibility. College textbooks, professional software, and educational materials can cost hundreds or even thousands of dollars. Some students argue that piracy allows them to learn when they otherwise couldn't afford the materials. Another argument is affordability. Video games, streaming subscriptions, music services, and software licenses have become increasingly expensive. Some people believe companies charge more than the consumers can reasonably pay. A third argument is that digital piracy is different from physical theft. If someone steals a laptop, the owner no longer has it. But if someone copies a movie, the original owner still possesses the file. Because nothing physical disappears, some argue that piracy causes less direct harm than traditional theft. Another point involves preservation. Sometimes software, video games, or movies are abandoned by publishers and are no longer sold anywhere. In those cases, piracy may be the only practical way to preserve digital history. Finally, some people argue that piracy functions like a trial version. They may pirate a game or software to test it, and if they do enjoy it, they purchase it later on. Now, these arguments explain why some people believe piracy can be ethical, but they don't necessarily prove that it is. Now, let's examine the opposing side. The strongest argument against piracy is that copyright exists to protect creators. Developers, musicians, filmmakers, authors, and software engineers spend months or even years creating work. Copyright allows them to earn income from that effort. When people pirate digital content, instead of paying for it, creators may lose potential revenue. While major corporations might survive those losses, independent artists and small software developers often depend directly on every sale. Another concern is incentives. If people consistently obtain creative work for free, creators may have less motivation or fewer resources to produce future content. Piracy also ignores agreements established by copyright and software licenses. When software or digital media is sold, creators specify how their work may be used. Piracy completely bypasses those agreements entirely. To evaluate this issue ethically, I'll use the ACM Code of Ethics. The Association for Computing Machinery developed this code to guide computing professionals in making ethical decisions. Three principles are especially relevant. The first principle, 1.2, avoid harm. Computing professionals should minimize harm to others whenever possible. If piracy reduces creators' income or discourages future innovation, it can be considered harmful. The second principle is principle 1.5. Respect the work required to produce ideas, inventions, creative works, and computing artifacts. This principle recognizes that software, music, games, books, and other digital products represent significant time, creativity, and expertise. Respecting that work includes respecting copyright. The third principle is Principle 2.3: Know and respect existing rules. Computing professionals are expected to understand and follow laws and policies related to intellectual property and software licenses. Now, let's apply these principles to digital piracy. Does digital piracy cause harm? In many cases, yes. While it's difficult to measure exactly how much revenue is lost, piracy can reduce earnings for creators, particularly independent developers and artists who rely heavily on sales. Does piracy respect creators' work? Generally, no. Even if someone believes prices are unfair, downloading copyrighted content without permission, it completely ignores the creator's right to decide how their work is distributed. What responsibilities do computing professionals have? Software developers, engineers, and IT professionals have a responsibility to use licensed software, respect copyright, and encourage ethical behavior in the digital world because they help build the technology people use every day. Their actions set an example for others. However, there are still difficult situations. Should educational materials always require payment if students generally cannot afford them? What about software or video games that companies no longer sell? Is downloading an abandoned game ethically different from downloading a brand new movie that just released? Some people also argue that pirating from a billion-dollar corporation is different from pirating from an independent musician or small game studio. These situations don't necessarily make piracy ethical, but they do show that the issue isn't completely black and white. In my opinion, even though digital piracy is generally considered unethical under the ACM Code of Ethics, I still sympathize with it in many situations. Digital media has become increasingly expensive over the years. College textbooks, whether physical or digital, often cost hundreds of dollars, placing a heavy financial burden on students. I've even had professors provide students with PDFs of entire textbooks because they recognized how unreasonable these prices were. The same trend can be seen in entertainment, where major video game companies now regularly charge $70 or more for new releases. I understand the ethical argument that creators deserve to be compensated for their work, and I especially believe independent developers, musicians, and authors should be supported whenever possible because their livelihood often depends directly on sales. However, I view large corporations differently. A single pirated copy is unlikely to have any meaningful financial impact on a multi-billion-dollar company. I also think it's important to recognize that many people who pirate content were never going to purchase it in the first place. From that perspective, the company isn't necessarily losing a sale, it's simply not gaining one that likely never would have existed. While I recognize that this perspective conflicts with principles of the ACM Code, particularly respecting creative work and intellectual property, I believe the issue is more nuanced than simply labeling all piracy as unethical. In cases where content is prohibitively expensive, educational resources are inaccessible, or large corporations dominate the market, I believe there are circumstances where piracy can be morally understandable, even though it's not legally permitted.